What has been some of the biggest successes that you guys have seen from this being a part of Eastview's culture and DNA?
I think, as we're continuing to get our student groups kind of off the ground, I think, I remember back at the fight nights, we had, I think, I heard from a female staffer that said that they had girls share stuff in the groups that they've never shared before. And I think that that's a really cool thing, obviously. And then also, I think that this provides these groups the curriculum because, like, we're going through Living Free, with some of our upperclassmen guys, and I feel like that place of grace and that space is just when you're young, when you're like in high school, before you get married, before you're in a relationship, before you're engaged, like kind of even taking those, like doing that before you're in a marriage setting, I think is really helpful. And also just provides, like, it would have been helpful for me to have that place when I was in high school. And it was really helpful I think it's just good for these guys to be able to process these really hard things with people who are in the same boat, who understand. Um, and I think for churches to not feel the pressure, it's like I feel like sobriety does not necessarily, if there's no sobriety right away, it doesn't mean that there's failure. It means that sometimes it just takes some time. I was on a Zoom call with some other people and they said that. And I was like, oh, that's really helpful because I'm really, really proud of the guys that have been through our groups because of the work that they've put in. And it's just cool to see. It's just good. It's just cool for them, good for them to have that space. So
Yeah. So let's see, successes. Uh, we have some tremendous support from two CSATs who attend our church, and from 2020, they really poured into me specifically by telling me about something called PSAP, and I had no clue about PSAP, but ended up going and getting PSAP certified in the middle of COVID. So started that in person in 2020. And then since 2020, we had that care group model where we had a 7 pillars group and a betrayal and beyond group. And I think Cooper and I just counted yesterday, we're at 15 pure desire groups. And that's Conquer Series, Living Free. Well, I don't need to list them. You guys know the groups that we're running.
Groups. Yeah.
We went from 2 to 15 in about 3 years. And that shows that we're having success. The business cards are working. People don't even go to our church are coming and they're finding healing. And then our biggest push is now take this back to your church. Who do I need to have a conversation with at your church to help you start those groups there? We do group leader training. So the second Sunday of the month, we're meeting with our leaders, and then the CSATs attend that as well to pour into our group leaders. And then, I mean, you literally get to see individuals, you get to see marriages, you get to see families just absolutely restored. And I don't know who you had on the podcast the other day, but he was talking about divorce, of like the impact that we can make if we can stop the divorces, like how the ripple effect that's having there. Like, I just see that as just one of the just deepest successes that we have of just being part of Christ's redemptive story in marriages.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's incredible what happens with that multiplying effect. And we often think in this area, it's kind of a small group, or it's maybe even one-on-one that healing happens. And it's like, well, how many people can we really impact? I'm just meeting with this one other guy. And I remember in the 7 Pillars of Freedom, in an older version, it used to ask in one of the last lessons, like, how many men are you trusting God for to impact with your story? And it was like over the next year and 3 years and 5 years. And I remember writing down the 5-year number, like I'd hoped I could impact maybe 100 men. And I thought that was a huge number. And I remember going through several groups and seeing that again and looking back and realizing that not that I'd met with all of these men one-on-one, but that the number of men I'd been able to impact because we'd done groups at our church and those groups had multiplied, and then other churches in our town had heard about it and they'd started groups, and I'd been able to share my story in front of our church and then been invited. I started out, it was in the thousands of people who had been impacted. And that doesn't mean every single one of them had gone through group and their life was changed and they'd say it was because of me, but it was to say there had been impact there that I never would have seen coming. And so when you guys say, 2 groups now up to 15, I think that's the same mindset of when we run a group and we invest in it and we lead people well towards wholeness, it multiplies. And so if 2 groups the next year becomes 4, and granted, that's not always perfect math. There'll be attrition or leaders that stop leading for various reasons. But 4 to 8 to 16, it starts to get exciting pretty fast when you realize, wow, that could, we're kind of on this bell curve that could take off. And so I would say to someone, if you're more in the place of, well, right now my story is impacting one other person. Okay, well, you're kind of at that bottom side, which is okay, 1 becoming 2, but to stay faithful, to do what God calls you to do, because 2 become 4 and 8, and as it multiplies, man, it can grow at some point. And you guys now are starting to see that exponential growth of, wow, we're just getting to invite so many people in because so many people have been trained, but that happened over time.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think, if you guys started having these conversations 10, 15 years ago, I think some people assume that a large church who's been having groups for 15 years would have hundreds of groups and it's just blowing up. And it's like, look, 15 maybe doesn't sound like, and I know for me, when I first started groups, it's like, I want 45 groups in this 200 person church. Let's do, it's like, okay, calm down. It's not going to happen, right? I've clearly never been good at math, but I think that it's important. I keep coming back to it. I can't get away from it. But I think it's cool to hear that you guys have a significantly sized church and that 15, that's solid, but it's also not, you have 150 groups. And so to keep that in mind, regardless of, wherever you are listening right now and the size of your church, that the fact that you're having groups creates that opportunity for that exponential growth, for sure.
And just to give some people some encouragement of this, when I came on, I was like Cooper, where none of my job description was anything related to Pure Desire. That was under a different pastor who had the care groups. And then in 2020, once I was trained in the PSAP, they said, you know what, we're going to give this ministry under you. And then 10% of my job description. And then with the group growth, it's been like, okay, let's move 30% of what you're doing to be allocated to this. And that's just showing the more that we've poured into it and invested in it, the more the church is saying, you know what, this is valuable enough. We're going to start putting your time towards this. And that's been it's such an encouragement.
It's amazing.